The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, turning the highway shoulder into a muddy mess. Daniel Cross stood beside the broken-down Honda Civic, his $2,000 suit completely soaked through, but he didn't care. The elderly woman sitting in the driver's seat was close to tears, and that mattered more than any expensive fabric. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Lee," Daniel said gently, rolling up his sleeves. "We'll have you back on the road in no time." He'd been driving home from the airport when he spotted her hazard lights flashing. Most people would have driven past, maybe called it in, but Daniel wasn't most people. 20 years in law enforcement had taught him that helping people wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. Even on his day off, even in a storm, even when he was exhausted from a 3-day conference in Chicago. Mrs. Lee clutched her phone with shaky hands. "My son, he's working late shift at the hospital. I don't want to bother him." "You're not bothering anyone," Daniel assured her, examining the flat tire. "This is what neighbors do for each other." At 42 years old, Daniel had seen just about everything during his career. He'd worked his way up from beat cop to detective to deputy chief in one of the country's largest police departments. He'd earned 2 master's degrees while working full-time, raised his daughter alone after his wife passed away, and never once forgot where he came from or why he'd put on the badge in the first place. Now, kneeling in the mud and rain, wrestling with a stubborn lug nut, he had no idea that the next 15 minutes would test everything he believed about the profession he'd dedicated his life to. The red and blue lights appeared first, reflecting off the wet pavement. Then came the sharp whoop of the siren. Daniel glanced up, expecting maybe a quick check to see if everyone was okay. That's what a good officer would do. Stop, assess, offer assistance if needed. Instead, what he got was Officer Trevor Mitchell. The patrol car stopped at an aggressive angle, lights still flashing. The door swung open and Mitchell stepped out, one hand already hovering near his service weapon. He was maybe 30 years old, medium build, with the kind of swagger that Daniel had seen before in officers who confused authority with power. "Step away from the vehicle." Mitchell's voice cut through the rain, sharp and accusatory. Daniel straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible. Years of training and experience kicked in automatically. Stay calm, don't escalate. Even though every instinct told him this was wrong, he knew exactly how these situations could spiral out of control. "Evening, officer," Daniel said evenly. "Just helping this lady with a flat tire." Mitchell's eyes scanned Daniel from head to toe, taking in the expensive suit, the confident posture, the BMW parked 50 feet ahead with its hazards on. But instead of seeing a good Samaritan, Mitchell saw something else entirely. His jaw tightened. "I said step away from the vehicle." Mrs. Lee leaned out her window, her accent thick with anxiety. "Officer, please. This man is helping me. My tire is flat. Ma'am, I need you to stay in your vehicle," Mitchell said, not taking his eyes off Daniel. There was something in his tone, something cold and certain, that made Daniel's stomach drop. He'd heard that tone before. He'd investigated complaints about officers who used that tone. Daniel kept his voice calm and measured. "Officer, like the lady said, I'm just helping her change a tire. My car is right there. I stopped when I saw she needed assistance." "Sure you did." Mitchell's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And I'm sure you just happened to be driving through this neighborhood in a BMW, just happened to stop, just happened to be going through her vehicle." "I'm not going through anything," Daniel said, forcing himself to stay patient. "I'm changing a tire. The jack is right there, the spare is on the ground. I haven't touched anything else." Mitchell moved closer, and Daniel could see it clearly now, the look he'd hoped he was wrong about. It was the look of someone who'd already written the story in his head, who'd already decided what kind of person Daniel was based on nothing more than the color of his skin. "Let me see some ID," Mitchell demanded. "Of course, it's in my wallet, which is in my car." Daniel gestured toward the BMW. "Convenient." "It's not convenient, it's just where my wallet is. I can walk over and get it if you'd like." "You're not going anywhere." Mitchell keyed his radio. "This is Unit 47. I need backup at mile marker 23 on Highway 9. Possible theft in progress." Mrs. Lee's voice rose in panic. No theft. He's helping me." "I asked him to help." Daniel's mind raced. This was spiraling fast. He could end it right now, just say the words, "I'm the new chief of police." But something stopped him. Maybe it was 20 years of investigating exactly this kind of behavior. Maybe it was the scientist in him, The part that needed to see how far this would go to understand the full scope of what needed to change. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he needed to experience what countless others had experienced without the shield of his position to protect him. "Officer Mitchell," Daniel said slowly, clearly, "you're making a mistake here. I'm happy to provide identification. I'm happy to answer any questions. But there's no crime being committed, and you know it. What I know," Mitchell shot back, stepping even closer, "is that you're in a neighborhood you don't belong in, hovering over a vulnerable elderly woman's vehicle, and getting defensive when a police officer asks simple questions. I'm not being defensive. I'm being factual. You're being suspicious." 2 more patrol cars pulled up, their lights adding to the surreal light show on the rain-slicked highway. A young officer stepped out of the first car, a woman who looked uncertain about the whole situation. The second car produced an older officer who took one look at the scene and immediately walked over to Mitchell. "What have we got, Trevor?" "Caught this guy going through her vehicle," Mitchell said, nodding toward Mrs. Lee's car. "Elderly victim, probably intimidated. He's refusing to provide ID." "That's not true," Daniel said firmly. "I offered to get my ID from my car. He refused to let me." The young female officer, her nameplate reading Rodriguez, moved toward Mrs. Lee's window. "Ma'am, are you all right? Did this man threaten you?" No. Mrs. Lee was nearly crying now. "He stopped to help me. My tire is flat. He's changing it for me. This is crazy." Rodriguez looked back at Mitchell, confusion clear on her face. "Trevor, maybe we should just..." "Should what?" Mitchell's voice went hard. "Should just let him go because the victim is confused. You know how this works. They sympathize with the perpetrator. Stockholm Syndrome or whatever. That's not what's happening here," Rodriguez said quietly. But Mitchell wasn't listening. He was on a roll now, and Daniel recognized the signs. This wasn't about a flat tire anymore. This was about something deeper, something uglier. This was about Mitchell proving something to himself, to his colleagues, to the world. "Turn around," Mitchell ordered Daniel, "hands behind your back. You're arresting me for changing a tire? I'm detaining you for suspicious activity, failure to provide adequate identification, and interfering with my investigation." Daniel took a slow breath. He could still stop this, but he didn't. Instead, he turned around and put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place, tighter than they needed to be. "You know what you are?" Mitchell's voice was low, close to Daniel's ear, meant just for him. "You're exactly what's wrong with this country. You people think you can dress up in fancy suits, drive expensive cars, act like you belong everywhere. But underneath all that, you're still the same, still primitive, still dangerous, like primordial beasts pretending to be civilized." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, not because they hurt his feelings, but because they confirmed everything he'd suspected about what was happening in departments across the country. This wasn't one bad apple. This was systemic. This was what happened when prejudice wore a badge. Daniel said nothing. He stood in the rain, hands cuffed behind his back, and watched as Mitchell went through Mrs. Lee's car, tossing her belongings with casual disregard. Watched as Rodriguez stood to the side, clearly uncomfortable but not intervening. Watched as the older officer shook his head but did nothing. A small crowd had gathered, people from the nearby houses, drawn by the lights and commotion. Phones came out. Video started recording. Daniel noticed all of it, cataloged all of it, the way he'd been trained to process crime scenes. Mitchell found nothing in Mrs. Lee's car, of course. Just an elderly woman's belongings, grocery bags in the trunk, pictures of grandchildren hanging from the rearview mirror. But instead of admitting his mistake, Mitchell doubled down. "We're taking you to the station for questioning," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "On what charges?" Daniel asked calmly. "Loitering, suspicious behavior, failure to provide identification, resisting arrest." "I didn't resist anything. You resisted verbally. Argued with my lawful commands," Rodriguez finally spoke up. "Mitchell, this is excessive. Just let him get his ID and..." "Are you questioning my judgment, Rodriguez?" She fell silent. Daniel watched this all play out with a strange sense of detachment. He'd investigated complaints like this, sat across from officers like Mitchell, tried to explain why this kind of policing was wrong, dangerous, illegal. But hearing about it and experiencing it were two different things entirely. Mitchell sneered. "Your BMW, right. Probably stolen too. Run the plates," Daniel suggested. "See for yourself. Mitchell gestured to Rodriguez. Call it in. She walked back to her patrol car and Daniel watched as she ran the information. Even from a distance, he could see the moment the results came back. Her body went rigid. She stared at her computer screen, then back at Daniel, then at the screen again. She returned to Mitchell quickly, pulling him aside. Daniel couldn't hear the whispered conversation, but he could see Mitchell's face change, color draining away like someone had opened a tap. The vehicle came back registered to Daniel T. Cross, but that wasn't what made Mitchell's hands shake. It was the flag in the system, the notation that made Rodriguez's voice urgent and worried. VIP clearance. Department priority contact. Mitchell walked back slowly, his earlier confidence evaporating. Okay, there's been a misunderstanding here. Has there? Daniel asked quietly. I'm going to remove the cuffs. Are you? Mitchell's hands fumbled with the key. The cuffs came off, leaving angry red marks on Daniel's wrists. He rubbed them absently, his eyes never leaving Mitchell's face. You're free to go, Mitchell muttered, just like that. Look, I was doing my job, okay? I see a situation, I respond. That's what we do. Daniel turned to Mrs. Lee, who was still sitting in her car, visibly shaken. Ma'am, let me finish helping you with that tire. You don't have to, she began. I want to, Daniel said gently. I said I'd help, and I meant it. He went back to the tire, kneeling in the mud again, and finished the job he'd started. Mitchell and the other officers stood around awkwardly, unsure what to do. The crowd slowly dispersed, though several people kept their phones out, still recording. When the spare was on and tightened properly, Daniel helped Mrs. Lee to her feet. You take this straight to a tire shop tomorrow, okay? This spare isn't meant for long distances. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing his hand. I'm so sorry about all this. Nothing to apologize for, Daniel assured her. You didn't do anything wrong. He watched her drive away safely, then turned back to Mitchell. The officer looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. Do you know who I am? Daniel asked. Mitchell shook his head, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. No reason you would, Daniel said. I'm just another person trying to help someone on the side of the road. That's all you needed to see tonight. But that's not what you saw, is it? Mitchell said nothing. Have a good evening, officer. Daniel walked back to his BMW, climbed in and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. His phone buzzed with a reminder. Monday morning, 8 a.m., mandatory department briefing. The day he'd officially be introduced as Riverside Police Department's new chief. He looked in the rearview mirror, saw the patrol cars still parked behind him, saw Mitchell standing in the rain looking lost. 3 days, Daniel thought. In 3 days, everything changes. He started his engine and drove home through the storm, already planning what he'd say when he stood in front of his new department. Already thinking about how to transform a broken system, already knowing that Officer Trevor Mitchell had no idea what was coming. But most of all, thinking about all the people who'd stood in the rain in handcuffs without the power to do anything about it afterward. The people who'd been called worse than primordial beasts, who'd been treated as less than human, who had no recourse, no justice, no voice. That was about to change. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that fills a workplace when everyone knows something big is about to happen. The Riverside Police Department's main briefing room buzzed with conversations, officers filing in with their coffee cups, some looking curious, others skeptical, a few clearly annoyed at the mandatory attendance requirement. Trevor Mitchell walked in with his usual confidence, laughing at something his buddy Kyle was saying about the weekend football game. The incident from Thursday night had barely crossed his mind after Friday. Just another day on the job as far as he was concerned. He'd handled a suspicious situation, ran the plates, let the guy go when things checked out, standard procedure in his book. I'm telling you, Kyle muttered as they took their seats in the middle row. This new chief is going to be some political appointment, probably never worked a real day on the streets. Trevor nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. That's what happens when the city council gets involved. They care more about image than actually keeping people safe. Around them, other officers settled into their seats. The room could hold about 80 people, and it was nearly full. Detectives, patrol officers, sergeants, even some of the administrative staff had shown up. Captain Patricia Hayes had made it crystal clear that this wasn't optional. Officer Jennifer Rodriguez sat 3 rows behind Trevor, her stomach in knots. She'd spent the entire weekend consumed by what she'd discovered. After running those plates on Thursday night and seeing the VIP clearance flag, she'd done what any curious officer would do. She'd looked deeper. What she found had kept her up at night. Daniel T. Cross, age 42, 20 years in law enforcement, started as a patrol officer in Detroit, worked his way up through narcotics, homicide, and eventually administration. Master's degree in criminal justice from Michigan State. Second master's in public administration from Northwestern. Served as deputy chief in Columbus, Ohio for 3 years before that. Decorated officer with commendations from 4 different departments. Published researcher on community policing strategies. Guest lecturer at the FBI Academy, and as of Monday morning, the new chief of police for Riverside. She'd tried calling Trevor twice over the weekend. He hadn't answered. She'd even considered driving to his house, but what would she say? Hey, remember that guy you handcuffed and called a primordial beast? Yeah, he's our new boss. Now, watching him joke around like nothing was wrong, she felt sick. Captain Hayes entered through the side door, her expression unreadable. She was a 25-year veteran, tough as nails and one of the few people in the department who seemed genuinely committed to doing things right. She'd seen chiefs come and go, weathered scandals and reforms, and earned respect through sheer competence and fairness. All right, settle down, she called out, and the room gradually quieted. I know you're all curious about why you're here, so I'll get right to it. As you know, Chief Morrison retired last month after 30 years of service. The city conducted a national search for his replacement, and I'm pleased to say we've brought in someone with exceptional credentials. Trevor rolled his eyes slightly. Kyle smirked. Captain Hayes continued, her tone growing more serious. Before I bring him in, I want to set some expectations. Chief Cross is here because this department needs to evolve. We've had issues, complaints from the community, concerns about our practices. Some officers in this room think those concerns are overblown. Others know exactly what I'm talking about. Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Trevor before moving on. Chief Cross has been brought in specifically to modernize our approach and address what the mayor has called systemic cultural problems. I expect every single one of you to give him your full cooperation and respect. This isn't a suggestion. It's a requirement of your continued employment here. A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Trevor's smirk faded slightly. He didn't like where this was going. Now, I've worked with a lot of chiefs over the years, Captain Hayes said, and I can tell you that this man is the real deal. He's done the work. He's walked the walk. And he's got the full backing of the mayor, the city council, and me. So whatever you might think about change, whatever resistance you might be feeling, I suggest you keep it to yourself and give him a chance. She paused, letting that sink in. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce Chief Daniel Cross. The door at the front of the room opened. Trevor's coffee cup slipped from his hand. The world seemed to slow down as Daniel walked into the room, dressed in a crisp new uniform bearing the chief's insignia. The polite applause that started died down quickly as recognition rippled through the crowd. Several officers who'd been at the scene Thursday night sat up straighter. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God," but Trevor heard none of it. All the blood had drained from his face. His hand started shaking. The room felt like it was tilting. No, this couldn't be happening. Daniel's eyes moved across the assembled officers, acknowledging faces, making mental notes. When his gaze landed on Trevor, it stopped for just a moment. Not angry, not triumphant, just aware. Then it moved on. "Good morning," Daniel began, his voice carrying easily through the room. It was the same calm, measured tone Trevor had heard on Thursday night, but now it filled the space with quiet authority. "I'm honored to be here, though I have to admit I've already gotten a preview of what we're working with." Nervous laughter from a few corners of the room. Trevor felt like he was going to throw up. "I believe in getting to know my department from the ground up," Daniel continued, slowly pacing at the front of the room, "not just reading reports or sitting in my office. I like to experience things firsthand. See how things really work when nobody knows they're being watched by someone with authority." The room had gone completely silent now. You could hear the ventilation system humming. This past Thursday evening, I had what you might call an educational experience. I was driving home when I saw an elderly woman stranded on Highway 9 with a flat tire. So I stopped to help her. Seemed like the right thing to do, you know? The kind of thing we tell the community we're here for. To serve and protect. Daniel paused, and in that silence, Trevor could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. While I was changing her tire, one of your colleagues responded to the scene. Now I want you to think about this situation for a moment. Elderly woman, clearly distressed. Man in a business suit helping her. Tools out. Spare tire on the ground. Pretty straightforward, right? A few officers nodded tentatively. But that's not what the responding officer saw. Despite the woman's repeated statements that I was helping her, despite clear evidence of what I was doing, despite my calm cooperation and offers to provide identification, I was treated as a criminal. I was handcuffed. I was degraded. And I was told, and I'm quoting here, that I was primitive and like a primordial beast pretending to be civilized. Gasps echoed through the room. Officers turned in their seats, looking around, trying to figure out who it was. Jennifer Rodriguez closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear. Trevor sat frozen. Unable to move, unable to breathe now, Daniel said. His voice still calm but carrying an edge now. I could have identified myself at any point. I could have said, "Hey, I'm your new chief." I could have pulled rank. Ended the situation immediately. Probably gotten that officer fired before I even officially started the job. He stopped pacing and faced the room directly. But I didn't. Want to know why? Nobody answered. Nobody dared. Because I needed to see the truth. Not the version of this department that shows up when people know they're being evaluated. Not the polished performance you put on for the cameras. I needed to see what happens when an officer thinks he's dealing with just another black man on the side of the road. Someone with no power, no recourse, no voice. Daniel's expression hardened. And what I saw was deeply, profoundly disappointing. It was racial profiling. It was an abuse of authority. It was a violation of at least 11 departmental protocols. It was everything that's wrong with policing in this country, condensed into 15 minutes on a rainy highway. Trevor's vision was tunneling. He gripped the edge of his chair to keep from falling over. But here's the thing, Daniel continued, and his tone shifted slightly. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to conduct a witch hunt. I'm here to fix a broken system. And that starts with accountability. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, opening it deliberately. Officer Trevor Mitchell. Stand up, please. The room erupted in whispers. Heads turned. Trevor felt every eye in the room land on him. His legs barely worked, but somehow he managed to stand, using the chair for support. His face had gone from pale to bright red. Daniel looked at him across the room. Come on down here, officer. The walk to the front of the room was the longest of Trevor's life. Each step felt like wading through concrete. The whispers followed him. He could feel the stares, the judgment, the shock. When he finally reached the front, standing a few feet from Daniel, he couldn't meet his eyes. Look at me, Daniel said quietly. Trevor forced his eyes up. I have here your incident report from Thursday. According to what you filed, you responded to a suspicious individual engaged in potential theft. You documented aggressive behavior and failure to comply with orders. Interesting, considering the video footage from Mrs. Lee's phone. Officer Rodriguez's dashcam and testimony from 3 witnesses tell a completely different story. Daniel pulled out several sheets of paper, holding them up, 11 protocol violations, racial profiling, unlawful detention, false statements in an official report, use of derogatory language. Any one of these would be grounds for termination. Together they paint a picture of an officer who has no business wearing this badge. Trevor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His career was over. Everything he'd worked for gone. And he deserved it. God help him, he knew he deserved it. I could fire you right now, Daniel said. I have every right to. Every justification. And I'm guessing a lot of people in this room think that's exactly what I should do. Some murmurs of agreement, some uncertain silence. But I'm going to give you a choice instead, Daniel said, and Trevor's head snapped up in surprise. Choice 1, you resign, today, right now. You walk out of here, we part ways, and you figure out what to do with the rest of your life. No public humiliation, no formal disciplinary record that follows you everywhere. Just a quiet exit. Trevor's mind raced. That was mercy. That was more than he deserved. He should take it and run. Choice 2, Daniel continued. And this is going to be harder than anything you've ever done. You stay, but you commit, truly commit to becoming a different kind of officer, a better person. You'll undergo complete retraining on my terms, bias awareness training, community policing certification, de-escalation workshops. And for the next 3 months, You'll spend every Tuesday and Thursday evening working with community outreach programs in the neighborhoods you've been policing. Trevor's eyes widened. You'll be partnered with Officer Rodriguez, who will file weekly reports directly to me about your conduct and progress. You'll meet with me personally every 2 weeks to discuss what you're learning, what you're struggling with, and how you're changing. You'll face people you've wronged. You'll hear their stories. You'll confront the ugliest parts of yourself. Daniel's voice grew harder. And understand this clearly: one slip, one hint that you're not genuinely committed to change, one report that you're going through the motions or that you've reverted to old patterns and you're done. Not just fired. I'll personally ensure that every department in this state knows exactly why you're unemployable in law enforcement. The room was absolutely silent. So what's it going to be, Officer Mitchell? The easy way out, or the hard road to becoming the officer you should have been all along? Trevor stood there, mind spinning. Every instinct screamed at him to take the resignation, to preserve some shred of dignity, to escape this nightmare. But something else stirred inside him. Shame, yes, but also something he hadn't felt in a long time. A tiny spark of something that might have been conscience. He thought about Thursday night, about Mrs. Lee's terrified face, about the way Daniel had stood there in handcuffs, calm and dignified, while Trevor spewed hate, about how he'd felt powerful in that moment, righteous even, when really he'd just been cruel. He thought about his father, who'd taught him to see the world in us versus them. About the echo chamber at work, the guys who reinforced every prejudice. About how easy it had been to dehumanize people when he had a badge to hide behind. Trevor started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. I want to stay. I want to do better. Skeptical murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jennifer Rodriguez looked shocked. Kyle in the third row shook his head in disgust. Daniel studied him carefully. Are you sure? This isn't about keeping your job, Trevor. This is about fundamentally changing who you are. I'm going to push you harder than anyone ever has. You're going to be uncomfortable every single day. You're going to want to quit 100 times. I'm sure, Trevor said, and he was surprised to find he meant it. What I did to you, what I've probably done to other people, it's inexcusable. If you're willing to give me a chance to make it right, then I have to take it. Daniel nodded slowly. All right. Report to Captain Hayes after this meeting. Your retraining starts today. And Trevor? Yes, sir. Thank you for making the harder choice. Now prove it wasn't a mistake. Trevor nodded and returned to his seat on shaky legs. The room remained silent. Daniel addressed everyone again. Let me be very clear about something. What happened to me happens to people in this community every single day. The only difference is I had the power to do something about it. Most people don't. They just have to live with it, carry it, accept that this is how they're treated by the people who are supposed to protect them. He let that sink in. That ends now. Starting today, this department is changing. Every officer will undergo updated training. We're implementing mandatory body cameras, active at all times. We're creating a civilian review board with real authority. We're establishing community liaison programs to rebuild trust. We're updating our policies, our procedures, and our culture. Some officers looked inspired. Others looked resistant. Most looked uncertain. I know change is hard, Daniel acknowledged. I know some of you are thinking this is political correctness run amok, or that I'm being too soft, or that this will make your jobs harder. But here's the truth, our job is to serve everyone equally. Not to police our assumptions. Not to let our prejudices dictate how we treat people. If you can't do that, if you can't get on board with treating every person in this community with dignity and respect, then you need to start looking for another career. Today. He closed his folder. That's all for now, dismissed. Officer Mitchell, Officer Rodriguez, Captain Hayes' office. Everyone else get back to work. And think about the kind of officer you want to be. As people filed out, the conversations were heated. Some officers looked angry. Some looked thoughtful. A few looked inspired. Trevor waited at the front, Rodriguez standing awkwardly beside him. Captain Hayes approached with an expression that was hard to read. That took guts, she said quietly to Trevor. Stupid, maybe, but gutsy. I don't feel brave, Trevor admitted. I feel like an idiot. Good, Daniel said, approaching them. That's where growth starts. Come on, we've got work to do. As they walked toward the captain's office, Trevor realized his life had just split into before and after. Before this moment, he'd been sleepwalking through his career, comfortable in his prejudices. After this moment, everything would be different, harder, painful. But maybe, just maybe, right? Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, and a new chapter began. The first week of Trevor's retraining felt like drowning in slow motion. Every morning started at 7 with bias awareness training led by Dr. Helena Price, a psychologist who specialized in implicit bias and prejudice. She didn't lecture. She didn't shame. She just asked questions that cut straight to the bone. "Tell me about the first time you remember noticing someone's race," she'd said on Tuesday morning. Trevor had sat in the small conference room, just him and Dr. Price wishing he could disappear. "I don't know. I guess I always noticed." "That's normal," she'd replied. "We all notice differences. But when did those differences start to mean something to you? When did they start to come with assumptions attached?" He'd thought about it, really thought about it, and the memory had come flooding back. He was maybe 8 years old, watching the news with his father. A story about a robbery. The suspect was black. His father had shaken his head and said, "See? That's what they do. Can't help themselves." Trevor had shared this memory reluctantly, feeling exposed and ashamed. Dr. Price had nodded, writing something in her notebook. "And your father said things like that often?"
"Yeah, I didn't think it was racist at the time."
He'd say he was just being realistic, just saying what everyone was thinking but afraid to say. "And did you believe him?" Trevor had paused. "I guess I did. For a long time I did. That was day 1. By day 3 they'd gone deeper, excavating layers of learned prejudice that Trevor hadn't even realized were there. The way he'd learned to tense up when he saw young black men in hoodies. The way he'd unconsciously categorized neighborhoods as good or bad, based on demographics. The way he'd interpreted identical behaviors differently depending on who was doing them. "Here's an exercise," Dr. Price had said on Thursday. "I'm going to describe a scenario and you tell me your gut reaction. Don't think too hard, just honest first instinct." She'd described a man standing outside a store at night looking at his phone. Then she'd shown Trevor 2 photos. One of a white man in business casual. One of a black man in jeans and a hoodie. Which one makes you more alert as an officer? Trevor had known it was a test. Known what the right answer was supposed to be, but Dr. Price had insisted on honesty. And honestly, the second photo had triggered every alarm bell he'd been trained to hear. "Why?" Dr. Price had asked simply. "Because..." Trevor had struggled. "Because that's who commits crimes in the areas I patrol." "Is it? Or is that who gets stopped, who gets arrested, who gets charged? What if I told you that drug use rates are nearly identical across races, but black Americans are arrested for drug offenses at 4 times the rate of white Americans? What does that tell you about who commits crimes versus who gets caught?" The session had lasted 3 hours. Trevor had left with a headache and a growing realization of how deep his conditioning ran, but the classroom training was nothing compared to the community outreach. Tuesday evening of that first week, Trevor found himself at the Riverside Community Center in the predominantly black neighborhood he'd patrolled for 5 years. Jennifer Rodriguez stood beside him, equally nervous but trying to hide it better. "Remember," she'd said before they went in. "Just listen. Don't defend yourself. Don't explain. Just listen." The meeting room was packed. About 40 people, ranging from teenagers to elderly residents, all there for the community and police dialogue session that Daniel had set up. Many of them recognized Trevor the moment he walked in. You could see it in their faces, the way conversations stopped, the way eyes narrowed. Reverend Thompson, a 70-year-old pillar of the community, ran the meetings. He was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes that somehow made Trevor feel even worse about being there. "We have a guest tonight," Reverend Thompson announced. "Officer Mitchell has been assigned by Chief Cross to spend time with our community, to listen and to learn. I want everyone here to speak freely but respectfully. This is a healing space, not a revenge space." A young woman in the front row, maybe 25, raised her hand immediately. Her name was Destiny, and Trevor recognized her. He'd pulled her over twice in the past year for failure to signal, though he'd let her off with warnings both times. "I've got a question," Destiny said, her voice tight. "Why should we teach you how to treat us like humans? Why is that our responsibility?" Trevor opened his mouth, but Jennifer touched his arm gently. "Listen, don't defend." "You're right," Trevor said quietly. "It's not your responsibility. It shouldn't be. I'm here because I need to change, and I can't do that in a vacuum. But you don't owe me anything." Destiny looked surprised that he'd agreed. She sat back, arms still crossed, but listening. An older man stood up next. Mr. Bernard. Trevor had responded to a noise complaint at his house once. Had been unnecessarily aggressive about it. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 42 years, Mr. Bernard said. Raised 3 kids here. 2 of my boys are successful businessmen now. But they still get pulled over in their own neighborhood. Still get questioned about whether they belong in their own homes. Do you know what that does to a man? To work hard your whole life. To do everything right and still be treated like a criminal in your own community?" His voice cracked slightly. "My youngest son, he's 16, and I had to have the talk with him." "You know what talk I mean, officer?" Trevor nodded slowly. He'd heard about it but never really understood. "I had to tell my boy," Mr. Bernard continued, "that when he gets pulled over, because he will get pulled over, he needs to keep his hands visible. Speak politely even if he's being disrespected. Don't make sudden movements. Don't argue even if he's right, because I need him to come home alive." The room was silent except for someone softly crying. "That's the talk I had to have with my son in America in 2024. In the land of the free. Because officers like you made me afraid for my child's life." Trevor felt something break inside him. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice came out rough. "I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't raise my sons without fear," Mr. Bernard replied. "Sorry doesn't give them back their dignity. What are you going to do different?" It was the question Trevor had been asking himself all week. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I'm trying to understand what I've been doing wrong, how I've been seeing people through this messed up lens. I know that's not enough, but it's where I'm starting." A teenage boy, maybe 15, spoke up next. "You pulled me over last month. Said I looked like someone who'd been reported in the area. You searched my backpack even though I told you I was just coming from basketball practice. You found nothing because there was nothing to find, but you treated me like I was lying the whole time." Trevor remembered. He remembered thinking the kid was being suspicious for not making eye contact, not realizing that the boy was terrified. The stories kept coming, one after another. Traffic stops that felt targeted, interactions that were unnecessarily aggressive. Assumptions that everyone was lying, everyone was dangerous, everyone was guilty until proven innocent. And the worst part? Trevor remembered most of these encounters. At the time, he'd thought he was just doing his job. Now hearing them from the other side, he saw them for what they really were, a pattern of dehumanization, death by 1,000 cuts. By the end of the 2-hour session, Trevor felt hollowed out. Jennifer drove them back to the station in silence. When they finally parked, she turned to him. "That was hard to hear," she said. "It was harder to realize I did all of that," Trevor replied. "I was there. I remember these people, and I remember thinking I was the good guy in every one of those stories. What are you feeling right now?" Trevor thought about it. Ashamed, angry at myself, confused about how I got so twisted up, and scared that I can't fix it, that it's too deep. Jennifer nodded.
Write all of that down.
Chief Cross wants a journal entry after every community session. He says awareness is the first step, but it's not worth anything if you don't process it. That night, Trevor sat at his kitchen table until 2 in the morning writing. Not the sanitized version he might have written for a performance review, but the raw truth. How hearing those stories had felt like getting punched repeatedly, how he'd wanted to defend himself, to explain that he'd just been following his training but realized that his training was part of the problem. He wrote about his father, about growing up in a house where prejudice was passed down like a family recipe, about how joining the force had felt like finding his tribe, other guys who saw the world the same way, about how that echo chamber had amplified everything ugly he'd learned as a kid, and he wrote about fear, fear that he was too broken to fix, fear that he'd ruined lives beyond repair, fear that even if he changed it wouldn't matter to the people he'd hurt. The next morning he had his first one-on-one meeting with Daniel. He handed over the journal entry expecting judgment or anger. Instead, Daniel read it carefully, nodding occasionally. "This is good," Daniel said finally. "This is honest. That's what I need from you." "I don't feel good," Trevor admitted. "I feel like garbage." "Good, you should. What you've been doing, what you've been part of, it's damaged people. That should hurt to realize." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "But feeling bad isn't enough. The question is, what are you going to do with those feelings? Are you going to let them paralyze you? Or are you going to let them fuel your growth? I want to grow. I just don't know how. You keep showing up. You keep listening. You keep confronting the uncomfortable truths. And eventually, you start making different choices. Daniel pulled out a file. Speaking of which, I want to talk about your arrest patterns. He spread out printouts showing Trevor's traffic stops and arrests over the past 3 years. The data was damning. Black drivers made up 70% of his stops despite being only 30% of the area population. His use of force incidents were almost exclusively with people of color. I didn't realize, Trevor started, then stopped. That's not true. Part of me must have realized. I just didn't want to see it. That's called willful ignorance, Daniel said, and it's almost worse than overt racism because you get to pretend you're not complicit. But the data doesn't lie. Your policing has been discriminatory, and that's caused real harm. Trevor stared at the papers, seeing his career reduced to charts and graphs that showed exactly what kind of officer he'd been. How do I fix this? You start by acknowledging it fully. Not just to me, but to yourself. Then you commit to a different approach. Next week, you're starting the de-escalation training. You're going to learn how to see people as people, not threats. How to calm situations instead of inflaming them. How to use your authority to protect rather than punish. Daniel closed the file. And Trevor, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I think you deserve a second chance. I'm doing this because the community deserves better officers. If you can become that, if you can truly transform, then you become proof that change is possible. But if you can't, if this is too hard or you're not really committed, then you're wasting everyone's time, including your own. I'm committed, Trevor said. I know I don't deserve this opportunity, but I'm not going to waste it. We'll see, Daniel replied. Time will tell. Now get out of here. You've got community patrol in the afternoon, and I expect a full report on every interaction. As Trevor left the office, he passed several officers in the hallway. Some ignored him. Some gave him looks of disgust. Kyle, his former buddy, actually sneered. Enjoy being the chief's pet project, Kyle muttered. Trevor didn't respond. A week ago he would have. A week ago he would have defended himself, gotten angry, maybe even started something. But now he just kept walking, because Kyle was wrong. He wasn't a pet project. He was a test case, proof that Daniel could take the worst kind of officer and reshape him into something better, or proof that some people were beyond saving. Trevor was determined to prove which one he was. That afternoon, he rode patrol through the same neighborhoods he'd been terrorizing for years, but this time with new eyes. He saw Mr. Bernard working in his garden and stopped to apologize properly. He saw Destiny at the gas station and gave her a respectful nod instead of a suspicious stare. And when he pulled over a young black man for a broken taillight, he noticed his own racing heart, his own instinctive fear response. But this time he breathed through it. Approached calmly, explained the issue politely, gave a warning instead of fishing for bigger problems. The driver looked shocked. That's it? No search? No attitude? That's it, Trevor confirmed. Get that light fixed, stay safe. As he drove away, Trevor realized something. That interaction had taken 3 minutes. 3 calm, respectful minutes. And it had been completely different from how he'd operated for years. It was one small moment. One tiny change in a pattern that needed wholesale transformation, but it was a start. And for the first time since Monday morning, Trevor felt something other than shame. It wasn't pride exactly, more like hope. The fragile, terrifying hope that maybe he could actually become the officer he should have been all along. The road ahead was long. The work was hard. The damage he'd done couldn't be undone, but maybe, just maybe, he could stop making it worse, and that was something. 3 months into his retraining, Trevor stood in front of the bathroom mirror at the community center, splashing cold water on his face. His hands were shaking. In 10 minutes, he had to walk into a room and face the one person he'd been dreading since this whole thing started. Mrs. Lee had requested to meet with him, the elderly woman whose tire he'd watched. Daniel changed that rainy night. The woman who'd begged him to listen, to understand that Daniel was helping her. The woman whose car he'd searched while she stood in the rain crying. Jennifer appeared in the doorway. You okay? No, Trevor said honestly. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's probably appropriate, she replied, not unkindly. What you did to her was terrible. She has every right to be angry. I know. What do I even say? Jennifer leaned against the doorframe. You say you're sorry. You don't make excuses. You don't try to explain it away. You just own it and let her respond however she needs to. Over the past 3 months, Jennifer had become something unexpected. A friend. Not the kind of buddy Kyle had been, reinforcing every bad instinct. A real friend who called Trevor out when he slipped into old patterns, who pushed him to dig deeper, who celebrated small victories and didn't let him quit when things got hard. Her weekly reports to Daniel had evolved from skeptical to cautiously optimistic. Trevor had read the last one over her shoulder. Officer Mitchell continues to show genuine effort, still struggles with instinctive reactions but consistently corrects himself. Community members report noticeable improvement in interactions. But today was different. Today wasn't about strangers in the neighborhood. This was personal. They walked together to the small conference room where Mrs. Lee waited. She sat in a chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Next to her sat a younger man, maybe 40, who Trevor assumed was her son. "Mrs. Lee," Trevor began, his voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me." She said nothing at first, just studied him with dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. Finally she spoke, her accent thick with emotion. "Do you remember what you did to me?" "Yes, ma'am. Every detail. Tell me," Trevor swallowed hard. This was part of his retraining too. Reverend Thompson had explained it weeks ago. The people you've hurt need to hear you acknowledge what you did. Not a generic apology, specific recognition of the harm. "I responded to the scene where you had a flat tire," Trevor said, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "Mr. Cross was helping you. You told me this repeatedly. You were clearly distressed and he was obviously assisting you. But I didn't listen. I assumed he was a criminal. I handcuffed him. I searched your car without cause, throwing your belongings around. I dismissed your testimony. I treated you like your word meant nothing." Mrs. Lee's eyes filled with tears. Her son reached over and took her hand. "I scared you," Trevor continued, his own voice breaking. "I used my authority to intimidate both of you. I violated your rights and his, and I did it because of racial prejudice. Because I saw a black man and an Asian woman and made assumptions based on nothing but the color of skin." "Why?" Mrs. Lee asked simply. "Why you think he was bad, man? He was helping me. You could see this, I know. There's no good answer. I was wrong. My thinking was poisoned by prejudice I didn't even recognize I had. But that's not an excuse. It's just the truth." The son spoke for the first time. "Do you know what you did to my mother? She didn't sleep for a week. She has nightmares about police now. She's afraid to drive alone. You took her sense of safety away." The words hit Trevor like physical blows. He'd been so focused on what he'd done to Daniel that he hadn't fully considered Mrs. Lee's trauma. "I didn't know," Trevor said quietly. "But I should have. I'm so sorry." "Sorry does not fix her nightmares," the son said sharply. "Sorry does not give her back her peace of mind. You're right. It doesn't. Nothing I say can fix what I did." Trevor looked at Mrs. Lee directly. "But I want you to know that I'm trying to become a different person. A better officer. So that I never do this to anyone else." Mrs. Lee wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Chief Cross, he is good man. He helped me even after what you do. He call me, check if I am okay. He apologize for you." Shame washed over Trevor. While he'd been feeling sorry for himself, Daniel had been taking care of the victim. "He told me you are training," Mrs. Lee continued. "He say maybe you can change." "I do not know if I believe this."